Hey, I'm going to just do a quick tutorial about how to round numbers on a number line. Um, don't think it's going to be as hard as it might seem right now. So let's say we're taking the number 2,762 and we're going to round to the nearest hundreds. So the first step is probably the same thing that you have already been taught or have been doing, and that's going to be to identify the number currently in the hundred spot. And in this case, we have a 7 in the hundred spot. So we know that everything to the left is going to stay the same, and everything to the right is going to turn into a 0. And those are the first steps that we're doing when we're figuring out whether this is going to round up or round down. The number in questions are hundred spot. It's either going to stay the same or it's going to go up by 1. It's never ever going to go down. It's not going to be a 6 or anything lower. It's going to either stay the same or go up. Now, the way that many people are taught, the way that I was taught, is to look one place to the right, and if it's 5 or higher, it rounds up, and if it's lower than 5, it rounds down. And that's not that's not incorrect. That's definitely going to work. But what the kids are being taught in that Ohio Learning Standard is why this works. So we're going to put this number on a number line, and we need to put 3 points on our number line. We know that the low end of their number line is going to be 2,700, and we know the high end is going to be 2,800. And our number falls somewhere in between these 2 points. So what we want to do is find the midpoint. And this is what's confusing a lot of kids because a midpoint is something they've probably never been asked to do before. And we're going to ask them, well, what falls between 700 and 800? And when we taught it in class, we just took a piece of paper, I folded it in half and said, what would be right here in the middle if I had 700 on one end and 800 on one end? And most of the kids know that there's a 50 involved. So in this case, it's going to be 2,750 is the midpoint. So the easy part now is to figure out where our 2,762 falls in regards to the midpoint. Is it less than the midpoint or more than the midpoint? And what we do is we look at those last 2 digits, the 62, and we compare it to the 50. Is 62 greater than 50 or less than 50? Well, we know that it's greater than 50, so that 2,762 is greater than the midpoint, which tells us that it's going to round up to 2,800. And the way that we write that, or the way that we're showing it, is 2,762 is about 2,800. It's an estimate. So we'll look at another one. Let's look at one with a little bit of a bigger value. Let's do 142,653. I just made that randomly. There's no rhyme or reason. And let's round to the nearest 10,000 spot. So a couple things to remember. First of all, we're identifying the 10,000 spot. And that's a 4 right now. We know that everything to the left stays the same. So I can go ahead and start setting my number line up, and I know that everything to the left stays the same. Everything to the right turns into a 0. Everything to the left stays the same. Everything to the right turns into a 0. And the only thing that might change is that 4. That 4 is either going to stay the same or it's going to increase by 1. So I know this number of 142,653 is between 140,000 and 150,000. The next thing I want to do is think about that midpoint. The midpoint, the exact middle between 40,000 and 50,000 is 45,000. And since we're still looking at that 145,000 is exactly the middle. So then I just look at the number I have, 142,653, and I have to think about whether it's going to fall more than the midpoint or less than the midpoint. So I'm looking at 2,653. Is that more than 5,000 or less than 5,000? Well, I know that 2,000 is less than 5,000. So it's going to fall somewhere in here, 142,653. And since it falls below the midpoint, I know that it's going to round down to 140,000. So again, I would write 142,653 to the nearest 10,000 is about 140,000. Sorry. The kids get confused when they're given the same number and asked to round it to many different places. And this is a big iReady question. So they'll have the same number and it might say round that number to the nearest tens and to the nearest hundred and to the nearest thousands. So I'm going to take my number to the nearest tens. I want to identify the tens spot. Whoops, I'm sorry, that is not correct. There we go. So the nearest 10 spot is our 8. So I know that it's going to fall between 1,280 and 1,290 because everything to the left stays the same, everything to the right turns into a 0. So it's going to fall somewhere between there. My midpoint is going to be 1,285. And I see that 83 is less than the midpoint. So to the nearest 10, it would round to 1,280. And they can do that all by themselves, but then when they have to do it three different ways, it gets a little confusing because we're still looking at the same number. We're still looking at the 1,283, but this time we're rounding it to the nearest hundreds. And I do the same exact thing. I'm going to start out saying, well, my hundreds right now is a 2. So I know everything to the left stays the same and everything to the right's a 0. So it's either going to be 1,200 or that 100 spot might go up by 1. It's going to fall between 1,200 and 1,300. The midpoint, 1,250. So then I look at my 83 and my 50. I know that 83 is larger than 50. So to the nearest hundreds, it would round to 1,300. And then we'll do the same exact thing with thousands. So I start out by identifying the thousands point or the thousands place, which is a 1. There isn't anything to the left. So I'm going to have a 1,000, or it's going to increase by 1 to make it 2,000. My number is going to fall between 1,000 and 2,000. What's the midpoint of 1,000 and 2,000? It's 1,500. I look at my 1,283. 283 is less than 500, so it's going to be less than the midpoint, which means to the nearest 1,000, it's going to round to 1,000. I'm not sure why this kind of problem confuses the kids because it's the same number being rounded 3 different ways, and I think that I don't know, I think they think that it has to be the same number, and you'll see here we have 3 totally different numbers. But that's rounding on a number line in a nutshell. You're going to see it that same way in iReady. So if you look through the book or look on any of the lessons with the kids, this is what they're looking at. Oftentimes they'll have multiple choice questions where it says like choose all or choose two. Those problems are missed a lot because they're only picking one. So you might want to sit with your kids and just get a feel for how iReady works, help them read it, help them understand choose all, choose three, choose any, things like that are what seems to be tripping the kids up a little bit. So we'll keep practicing also. We'll keep learning and looking at that vocabulary. But right now, hopefully that helps you a little bit with how to round on a number line.